on. Hello, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to be back at TEF. I was only here last year, but it feels like a lot longer with everything that's been going on in the past year. It seems that there's no single discussion about localization these days without the word technology or AI in it. There's an AI for everything, it seems, these days. With large language models and Gen AI, a lot of things are changing in localization, and there's a lot of repercussions. In media where I work, for instance, we had two big strikes this year, a screenwriter strike and actor strikes in Hollywood with global support. Second one still going on, actually. And from the subtitlers front, they're all talking a lot about machine translation as things get implemented a lot more widely and the effect this has on the end product quality. I guess some of this shouldn't come as such a big surprise, since last year when we were here, when we asked people what did they think the future holds for media localization, or in general, everyone said technology, post-editing, and everything. We had a discussion last year on the topic of quality in localization because of the implementation of machine translation in the creative industries. And of course, creativity came up a lot there. There was even a parallel discussion going on in the chat about it. So I'm very pleased to have the opportunity to actually address this very hot topic specifically this year, and no less with three experts that are here with us today to share their knowledge and experiences. So welcome everyone. I will introduce them in reverse alphabetical order for a change. So first, the person in the middle is Dr. Waltraud Kolb, Assistant Professor of Literary Translation from the University of Vienna. Waltraud has specialized in comparative literature in her PhD, and she's also done a lot of research in digital tools and the use of machine translation in the literary field. And she's also worked in the literary translation and post-editing processes. But more important than that, she's still an active literary translator, and she also is a member of the executive board of the Austrian Association of Literary Translators. It's a pleasure to have you with us, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this very hot topic and what associations like yours actually have to say on it.
Thank you very much, Jutta. Hello, welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I also look forward to what we're going to discuss in the next hour.
Thank you. And next to her, to my right, is Anna, who was participating very actively in the chat last year. She has also done a lot of work on this specific topic. Dr. Anna Gerber-Arenas is an associate professor at the University of Groningen. She's been in the translation field for over 2 decades. We don't need to count more than that. She has a background in the industry, and then she moved on to the academia. And she's done a lot of research and published a lot on post-editing, machine translation, productivity, translator training, ethical considerations of machine translation, and so on. More specifically, until last year, she was working on a project called CREAMT, specifically looking at the effect of machine translation on translation creativity in literary texts and on the reader's narrative engagement and enjoyment. And now she's continuing this work with another project called INCREC, where she will explore this intersection of technology and creative translation further. Welcome back to TEF, Anna.
Thank you very much. And thank you everyone for being here so early or not so early.
That is true.
It depends on what happened last night, right?
Yes. And last but not least, we have Alexandra Hecker from Pixelogic Media. Alexandra is a German translator and subtitler. She is currently in charge of the Into English subtitling division of Pixelogic Media, which is one of the leading companies in the media localization field. She is the territory manager for the EMEA region, and given her experience with post-editing as a subtitler, she was involved recently in the rollout of post-editing workflows in the company, and she will tell us about that. Thank you for making the time to join us, Alex.
Hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, in my work with translators in the creative fields, I've heard many times of people saying how machine translation helps them be more creative by giving them ideas that they hadn't thought of before. And on the other hand, one of the things that translators are most concerned and complain about the most is the effect when it comes to the use of MT, is the effect it has on the creative industries, that it hampers their creativity and it affects the quality of the end product. Both of these responses came up actually at our panel last year, and I'd like to take some time to talk a bit more about these two different statements, which seem contradictory at first. So I would like to start with a definition of creativity. Let's see if this works. So since this is the trend in all conferences, I thought I'd also ask ChatGPT what it says creativity is. I actually love the fact that the first word in the definition is creativity, and you have this spelling mistake there to remind you this is ChatGPT writing all this. I don't know. I've never heard of it before, but well, now you have. Anyway, so this is what ChatGPT says creativity is. But I'd like to ask Waltraud, what is creativity in translation?
Yeah, creativity is not an easy concept, I think. It's a term that we use all the time, but not everyone understands it to mean the same thing. First of all, it can refer either to a person, their personality, their skills. It can refer to the activity, the process of producing something in a particular way. And it can, of course, refer to the product and certain qualities of this product. In psychology and creativity studies, there are different models that try to capture what exactly a creative personality or person is. And we often come across personality traits such as curiosity, openness, flexibility, but also self-confidence, for example, and motivation. And this seems relevant in our context as well, because motivation will, of course, also depend on the working conditions, the working environment of translators. And then there is consciousness. Some see consciousness at the root of creativity. And if that is the case, creativity would be an inherently human trait, which machines could at best imitate. Less generally speaking, a creative translator would be someone who is able to tackle a translation problem from a new perspective that opens up new possibilities to solve this problem, someone who leaves beaten tracks, we could say, and that's often associated with processes like lateral thinking, divergent thinking. And on the product level, a creative translation could be defined to meet two criteria. The first one being that it is a solution to a problem that's new, novel, the solution, not the problem, of course, and that does not use standard, direct, literal solutions in the target language, but something novel, surprising, maybe unexpected. And the second criterion would be that it also meets the purpose. It fits the purpose and is acceptable for the target audience. Now, these are two very broad definitions that come from creativity studies and have been widely used in translation studies. And if we use those two criteria, MT systems are well able to come up with creative solutions to some translation problems.
Thank you, Waltraud. I also got ChatGPT to summarize some of these traits of creativity that you talked about, and I think it's a pretty accurate list. It covered quite a lot of what you talked about, originality, the value, that the solution needs to be of value, problem solving, of course, divergent thinking that you mentioned, and so on. I would like to move on to Anna, and this is the definition of creativity in translation that Anna and Antonio Toral published last year. And what I'd like to ask you, Anna, is how can you actually measure? Can you measure creativity in translation, and how can you do that? It is very complex, as Waltraud explained. So how can we say, this is so creative or less creative?
So very complex to do it, and it will always be approximations that you are testing, like in any scientific endeavor. I think what Waltraud referred before also applies to quantifying. So you have the person, you have the process, you have the product, and you also have something called the press, which is the environment that fosters creativity. And that would be in relation to training, for example, that we saw in Catherine's panel yesterday. So you have to decide first, what am I going to measure, to know then how to measure that. So there are standard tests, for example, to measure the person. Some people might use, the Torrent test of personality and then correlate that with a translation to see, is a more creative personality produces more creative translations. I wasn't interested in that in particular because even in psychology, it's very, very difficult to define what is a creative person, in which domains, then we add to the complexity. So if we look at the product, which is something that we do quite a bit in translation, we have some tools in translation studies that are called, also referring to Waltraud's definition of creativity, which encompasses novelty and appropriateness, usefulness, fit for purpose. So in translation, we use creative shifts or translation shifts, which are options. This comes from applied linguistics, but we can talk about that in the break. So they are shifts from the source text that are seen in the target text. And then we have errors to measure how appropriate that is. So to give you an example, machine translation can create something novel. It can make up words. But is this creative if it's not useful for the target audience?
Or creative.
Or creative. No, I think creative actually exists, but anyway. So these are the way that we have to measure. We could also, some other researchers have used something that is the consensual agreement, where a team of experts, say, for example, expert literary translators, decide following an order and following, it's a formal test, which of the options is more creative. So you have the consensus of a team of experts to measure that. We have also toyed with the idea of automatically measure creativity in translated texts.
How can you do that?
So, with a lot of trial and error. So we have used word embeddings, and then the semantic distance, or the cosine distance between those word embeddings in bilingual word embeddings. And then with the idea of the shift, if you shift in meaning, it means that there is a departure from the source text. So therefore, we think that must be a sign that there is creativity in the target text. So this is when you want to use automation to do this. And we have tried this with some of our students, but it's still in the early stages. But we have seen something that when the cosine distance is very far apart, so it's very high, for example, in documentaries, it was lower than in action movies or in drama. So, but I mean, all this very rudimentary in manually annotating creative shifts and errors using, the tools that we use in translation. that we have used more.
It must take quite a lot of time to do this kind of analysis in text, right?
A lot of time, yeah.
I'm glad you're continuing your work on this. I wanted to ask Alex next, since you have implemented machine translation, what do translators say? Do they talk about any effect on their creativity one way or another as a result of the machine translation when they're post-editing?
Yes, they definitely do. We've actually done a little survey amongst our active post-editors to ask them about that, about their experience with post-editing, but also whether they think that post-editing has an effect on their creativity. And 80% of them believe that it does, of which 60% believe in a negative way and 25% in a positive way. Only 20% feel that it does not affect their creativity in any way. We've also asked for the reasons, like what makes a negative effect for them. And they said that machine translation would hinder them from thinking about alternative or better solutions, that they kind of settle with what is acceptable, and then they move on to the next subtitle. And those that said it would affect them positively said, surprisingly, that it helps them to think outside the box, to come up with solutions they might not have necessarily come up with otherwise. So kind of contradicting each other. So I found that very interesting to have these two very different perspectives.
It's again the same thing that came up last year that I said in the beginning, right? I was wondering, do you have any demographics for each group? You know, the ones that said it helps them and the ones that said it didn't. I was wondering whether the ones that said it helps them might be less experienced, perhaps?
Yeah, actually, that's also surprising. We thought that the more junior translators would be more open to post-editing, more perceptive, but that's not true. I mean, our survey is by no means representative, but those that replied in both a negative or positive way were on average 40 years old with about 12 years of subtitling experience, so quite senior already. And we couldn't prove that, you know, that there's a gap or a difference in age or seniority or experience even.
Well, maybe you can repeat this survey with larger numbers of translators so we can have more concrete results. But this split still seems to appear. And again, I get the same feeling from what you're saying as I've been getting in my own work, that more people say it's negative, and there are some people that say it's positive, but those tend to be fewer in my experience as well. So if creativity is indeed hampered, then of course this means that we would have flatter translations, which of course should not be as engaging, I expect, for the audience. And actually in the manifesto on machine translation that was published by the Association of Audiovisual Translators in Europe, they are saying there that some translators, when they post-edit, they produce lower quality work than they would otherwise produce, than they are capable of producing. So I was wondering, Anna, what is your opinion on this? Have you actually had any similar findings in your work?
Yeah, I want to say about the manifestos on one side and on the other side, the NMT developers that sell the wonders of, you know, translators will be replaced. In this spectrum of there are a lot of generalizations that I think are necessary to reach the public, and they are very important because you are visible. Translators are visible, and their voice is visible. But in science, if I may call this what I do science, we tend to look at the concrete. We tend to look for questions to answer and data to back up that. So then our results are always, they ask us, but is it true? And you say, well, it depends. It depends on the context, like a translator would say. So it depends on the engine you are using, the language combination, a lot of factors that will probably give you different results. But in the research that I have done with translators, and we did for English Catalan and English Dutch, several tests, translators report a constraint in their creativity. So when they are interviewed, and this is in line with what Alex said, and Walter also can, I think, say that, sorry. It is true that they report, and they often say, I've often hear translators and now writers talking about a corset almost, because we are using MT as a default proposal, or when MT is used as a default proposal. What I found also looking at empirical data, so analyzing the creative shifts and the errors that I mentioned before, is that when the source text, so if you look at the source text to look for problems that I call units of creative potential, the higher the number of units of creative potential in a source text, probably the gap in creativity between machine translation, post-editing, and human translation is wider. So, to give you an example, maybe romance or thrillers, if there are less, I don't want to diminish the genre, but if they are less creative in the source, then maybe, you know, the gap between especially PE and HT is not that wide. But there is another factor, that is who is reading or who is evaluating this. And this is what is called the press in the factors that we mentioned earlier. So for reviewers, it was very, the reviewers that I work with worked blindly, so they don't know what they are reviewing. For them, there was kind of very obvious what machine translation was, but not so obvious when it was PE or HT, but all of them, in all the experiments that I have done, would say the HT translation was the publishable translator, and the PE, not knowing what it was exactly, they would say, oh, maybe this is from a novel translator or somebody that is not a literary translation, if you work with a literary text, which are obviously very good translators. Well, the ones that I work with were. So not only more errors, but less creative shifts in MT and in PE. We also did an experiment with AVT that it was mainly reception, but I think it's important to say that when we analyzed the number of changes that subtitlers had done in the MT output to bring it up to the level of human translation, a measurement that we use that is called HTER, maybe somebody knows about this, but it doesn't matter what it is, but it measures changes done in the output. It was much, much higher for PE than you would normally think or that you would normally use to offer a discount. So the question is, if I have to make so many changes in a creative text to bring it up to the level, then probably the discount is not applicable, right?
Well, basically you're saving, I suppose, less time. I mean, it does make sense that you would make more edits in post-editing the more creative
I
the
haven't
text is,
seen
no?
in literary text time savings. So some translators would say what you said before. Sometimes it was helpful. So they are not dismissive of MT. So they would say, yeah, sometimes, you know, I thought, oh, I translated this and the MT used this translation. Oh, I like it. As a colleague or a co-creator. But I didn't see a lot of time savings overall, and we measure pauses. I mean, we can talk long about the research, and it's all published. So, but yeah, this is basically what I found. So it's difficult to generalize because maybe you work with another language combination, Catalan, Spanish, for example, which are very close, and maybe you get another result. I don't know, but we see a trend. And I think in the also research that Waltraud had done and other people with post-edits and you know the priming effect that she will talk about, you also see other things that happen when you use machine translation as default.
Well, basically, what I get from all of what you said is the impression that the reviewers had, that they always selected the human translation as the best, and they thought the post-edited was the work of a less experienced translator. To me, that says that basically the effect that you're seeing with post-editing is that you can have a good enough result, maybe a very good translation, but perhaps not that exceptional translation.
But they
that
also
you might be looking
said
for.
with the empty output, they also said, "Oh, you edited this. This is machine translation, but it's too good." And I said, "No, I didn't edit anything. It was a customized engine, so
They
it
were
was
surprised by the
engine
quality.
adapted to literary text." So, and then I asked the reviewers, "Would you have this MT if you had anything else?" All the Catalans said, "Yes, we prefer MT than nothing." The Dutch were not so sure. So also the status of the language is important, you know?
That's very interesting. I was also reading an article published in Multilingual by someone called Despina Pilou from a Greek language service provider. And in her company, she noticed that the quality of the work of some of the translators that were working primarily on machine translation post-editing projects had actually dropped even when they were not working on post-editing projects. And she actually pioneered some training program to bring their quality back up, and successfully so, actually. So I was wondering, Baltraud, what do you think about this? Is it, is post-editing kind of contaminating us? Are we forgetting our translation skills as a result of habituation, of seeing and working with too much machine translation? I was wondering, you're a literary translator. What happens to literary translators when they use machine translation? Does it affect their work somehow?
Yeah, it's an interesting article that you mentioned, and I tend to agree that we have to expect some extent of de-skilling because I think translation skills, they need they develop over time. We develop them over time through practice, and they need nurturing. And if you do mostly post-editing over, let's say, an extended period of time, and you are constantly exposed to machine-translated language, I think we have to expect that this somehow has some impact on your own language skills and language use. Now, do literary translators use MT? That's also not an easy question because things are very much in flux in literary translation right now. Like in surveys a few years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, MT played practically no role. The most recent survey that I'm aware of was done by the French Association of Literary Translators, and that was less than a year ago. And in that survey, 14% of respondents had already been approached by publishers for post-editing work, and that's a quite surprising number, surprisingly high for literary translators. And I think we have to expect this number to rise. But of course, it very much depends on what kind of books we are talking about.
Exactly.
And for example, in non-fiction, machine translation already plays a much bigger role than it does for fiction currently. And then for fiction, we have also to consider what kind of fiction, what type of fiction we are talking about. You mentioned romance, things like that. So it depends very much, and it's very difficult to generalize, as you said, Anna. Now, you asked about the impact MT has on the work of literary translators. And you already mentioned what we call priming, and I've also found that in my own studies, and there are other studies that have come to the same conclusion, and that's that this priming happens on all sorts of levels.
So can you give us a definition of what priming is for the audience? Because I'm not sure if everyone is aware.
It means that you are influenced by the MT draft that's already there, so that it gets very difficult to escape this first draft that's already there and to work against it.
And there are traces, no, of that in the target
yes,
text.
I'm coming to that, of course, yeah. Sorry. And it happens on all levels. That's what we have also found. For example, on the content level, the way post editors read and interpret the source text, the story, the events, the scenes, the characters, that's predefined by the MT draft, and it's extremely time consuming and also cognitively very demanding to resist this influence from the MT draft. And also on the stylistic level, for example, and regarding narrative voice. So also stylistically, the MT sets the tone of the whole narrative from the start. And I think in the literary translation community and in the studies that have been done, literary translators who did post-editing for those studies, they are more critical, I think, even than subtitlers. And I think they're quite unanimous in saying that they perceive the MT draft as a serious constraint of the way they engage with the text, both with the original and also with the target text. And one participant, she compared the MT draft with a pane of glass that separates her from the text, and I think that's a very nice image. And Anna, you mentioned the product level. What I have found in my own studies is that post-edited texts are different from human translated texts in a number of respects. They tend to be syntactically closer to the original. They tend to be lexically less rich, less diverse. Language is more normalized, we could say. So the individual translator's personal style is less manifest in a post-edited version versus a human-translated version. And post-edited versions of the same source text tend to be more similar to each other than human-translated versions of the same source text. So all in all, I think the literary translation community is very concerned about the increasing role played by MT in literary translation, and that's due to the expected impact on contracts, of course, on fees, and what literary translators demand in several papers that are being produced now by associations in different countries is that publishers should pay the same fee as for human translation. Then it's about copyright questions, of course. And then I think there is also an emotional level and a motivational level because it also has an impact on literary translators' self-image, their identity, because they perceive post-editing as less of a creative activity and certainly not as a form of art.
Well, it definitely is less creative, I suppose, to correct even another person's work. There's a lot to unpack from your answer. I would like, if indeed machine translation dampens our translation abilities, I wonder for the language service providers that actually use post-editing workflows, what should one do to guard against this potential loss in quality, especially when it comes to texts that are creative and, well, basically if they're not creative, they're not going to be engaging, they will not fulfill their purpose. I don't know if you've noticed any trends with your translators either, Alex, perhaps would like to share your thoughts on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, we've only recently introduced post-editing to our workflows, and also only on a very small scale, just on a couple of projects for a couple of clients. So we don't have the data yet to see whether machine translation does have a long-term effect on our translators' creativity and ability to subtitle. So we're going to keep a close eye, but your research, like Waltraud research, does suggest that, and that's also the fear and the impression that our translators have. So we use that as an early warning indeed, and already put our heads together to see how we could prevent quality from really deteriorating. And we have built like a training course internally in our company to engage with our subtitlers and translators to form this together. Like one part is educating about machine translation, but also looking at what types of errors machines make to really understand what it means to post-edit a machine. So we hope that with enough training, engagement, we can kind of preserve the skill that our translators bring to the table. Also, another thing is technology, like we're building a new subtitling platform that will allow our post-editors to use machine translation really as an aid, like some sort of supporting documentation almost, that will help them work more efficiently and not force it on them, so that they can still stay in control of the process, and that they are still the expert in this.
Well, another thing to look at perhaps could be the allocation of work to people. If indeed working solely on post-editing affects your translation skill, perhaps the right course of action would be to make sure that everyone does a mix of tasks, translation from scratch and post-editing, and not just one or the other, so that your translation skills at least remain intact, I suppose. And in the in Despina's case, in Orco, because I spoke to her, I was very curious to see what she did. The training program she worked on was to have people do some creative writing exercises. That was the training, the ones that she had noticed drop in quality. That's what they worked on, and then their quality actually went back up very successfully. So that was very interesting. And another colleague actually who I was talking to, she was saying that she noticed the same effect on her, and she needed to go back to translating to recalibrate herself. So maybe that is something to think about. I'd like to change the topic a little bit and talk about LLMs and Gen AI. The first use cases we've seen of such tools have been to create text from scratch, and I've heard of language service providers that actually use ChatGPT for marketing text to produce text in target languages anew, not a translation, with a basis of a prompt and a brief, or prompts and brief, to create text in target languages that is new text. Instead of just translating. Anna, I was wondering what you think of such usage.
Yeah, in fact, so GPT was around before ChatGPT, right? So we could see, I'm terrible at this. We could see already that GPT had a fluency, right? GPT-2, GPT-3. When ChatGPT kind of broke through in November last year. So my first thought was precisely not about translation being better than NMT models, which have been customized, are quite advanced in certain language pairs. My first thought was, as a translator, if you require translation services from a creative nature, you could generate your own texts and then have annotators curate the text so it's not so monotone and so boring, as I'm sure most of you have seen. The results are sometimes very monotonous. So I tried certain translations with the experiments that I had done in GPT-4, the paid version, which is quite different from the 3.5 free version. And the results in translation for, again, texts that are demanding wasn't that different from for now. everything is for now, right? From the NMT, very customized engines that we are used to. But I saw an emerging role, which is not the one only using a target text or a source text, but a generated text in your language. So the companies will engage with translators that could also write. And I've been saying for a number of years now that I think the training that we offer is not like yesterday they were saying in the panel, rightly so, that the fundamentals have to be there. But we as trainers, we need to tweak our courses all the time to adapt to new things, right? Of course, you have to prompt correctly these models to get the text that you want, even the translation that you want. And there is some research on this, and by advanced prompting, the results improve. So that's,
I wonder how much you need to prompt, though, right, to get
exactly when it becomes financially viable or not. But also to write, to know the fundamentals of writing. So we have just finished writing an article on a course that we implemented in SERI on creative writing for translators. Creative writing and writing. So writing, rewriting for translators. And I know Walter was telling me that there is a course already, for example, in University of Vienna. So I think also to involve AI in the creative writing course as well, as a co-pilot, to learn how to prompt, but also to learn how to edit. So I think this is in demand, will be in demand. We need to make sure that it's paid accordingly to the effort, right?
It is very interesting, I think. And actually, because I do some marketing text sometimes, I find that when I'm tired, I will use ChatGPT sometimes, and what I will get will not be any good at all, but it will be sentences that I can reuse, you know.
For drafting.
Yes, just to get out of this first draft, you know, give me something to start with, even if it's not exactly, you know, right.
But for students, I think...
But you have to know.
Exactly.
You have to know how to make it
exactly.
right? Because if you don't, then, you know, you will produce
mediocrity. And then you can use
mediocrity.
the technology, right? And say, okay, it's the same thing with creative shifts and errors. First, you need to know how to identify that. You cannot be kind of dropped in the deep end of things, right?
I actually asked ChatGPT what it thinks, whether it thinks it is creative, and it says, well, it thinks, so to speak, it sees itself as a tool, not creative, but a helpful resource for creative tasks. So I wanted to ask Waltraud, how can technology be helpful to literary translators if, you know, they're not saving any time, and if it hampers their creativity? Can it be helpful? How?
Yeah, I think it can helpful depending on what kind of scenario you have in mind. I'm sure some literary translators are also experimenting with ChatGPT at the moment, but I can't say anything meaningful as to the usefulness of ChatGPT. I think what we can say is, and what has also been shown in studies, and what translators, participants in studies say, is that they do find it useful if there is a particular phrase, a particular word, so that they would use MT as a source of inspiration, as a tool that supports their own brainstorming or their own creative process, we could say. And there are also more specific tools that are designed to support this creative process of human translators. I collaborated with a colleague on a study in which we tested a tool that was developed specifically to help with the translation of wordplay and puns, for example.
I can imagine how such a tool would be very useful for dubbing adapters as well, who have to find words that fit lip movements. I wanted to ask Anna, but we don't have a lot of time, so try to keep your answer brief if possible. What do the viewers think? The viewers, the readers, you know, what is their reaction? Are they just as engaged with post-editing texts or not?
Yeah, so this another difficult thing to respond, because it's very language dependent and reader dependent. This is common sense, right? It depends on what type of reader you are. But we tested like 200 people on one experiment on literary text and 100 and something in AVT text. And we saw that, for example, for Catalan, the HT, so the human translation, scored very high and significantly higher on narrative engagement, enjoyment, and translation reception. Machine translation always significantly lower in all accounts. Always people get lost. Sometimes they don't know it's machine translation because at the end of the survey we asked, did you realize this was machine translation? Sometimes they don't know, but still they didn't engage. But between PE and HT, which is the big debate, for example, for Dutch, there wasn't a significant difference between the two, and there was a certain tendency for the PE. And I thought, this is a hypothesis that needs to be tested if somebody is interested, that because the Dutch read so much in English, they would be inclined for a text that is closer to some English structures, as opposed to the Catalans, that those structures would be a bit strange for them. And for the AVT, the PE version resulted in higher results than HT and MT, but as I said before, the subtitlers implemented so many changes in the
Text.
the subtitles that is almost is human, really, you know. So that's another factor to study, you know, when it becomes, you know, almost human anyway.
That is a very important research, and I think more of it is actually needed, because that's the argument of buyers. Is it good enough for the audience? Now that we've discussed creativity from a lot of different angles, I'd like to launch the first Slido poll, if possible, and ask the audience to answer on the basis of our discussion today and their own experience as well. What do they think? Answer the main question of our panel. Technology and creativity, friends or foes? Let's see. What do people say? Okay, friends. Wow, that is surprising to me. I expected more people to answer. I don't want to influence anyone here. That is a shift from what I've been hearing. Very interesting. Well, on a related...
Maybe it's technology, the word. Maybe if you ask machine translation, they would, or large language models.
Maybe.
But technologies, it could be, you know, a sketch engine or...
Well, let me ask this question differently then. Again, on the AVT manifesto, there's a phrase that says, unscrupulous use of MT will increasingly lead to brain drain and talent crunch. This undermines the long-term sustainability of the industry. So basically, people will leave the industry because they don't like post-editing for whatever reason. It could be a reason of, you know, it's not fun anymore to translate, or it could be as a result of the rates, I suppose, or something else. I was wondering, Alex, if you have any comments on this. What do you see with your translators? Are they leaving the industry when they hear post-editing? Do they want to change jobs? Are we taking the fun away and driving people away?
Luckily, not just yet. In that same survey, we asked them exactly that question. If post-editing was here to stay, would you want to stay in this industry, or would you want to consider changing your profession? And 50% of the respondents said that they would want to observe how the industry evolves. 40% said that they would definitely stay, and 10% said they would stay if machine translation quality would continue to improve. And I thought that was a really good result for us as an LSP to see that our translators are not leaving and running away. And no one ticked that they would definitely leave, which was also an option they could have ticked. So that is really good to see. And also, again, looking at the demographics, our post-editors were 40 years old on average. So again, we can't speak that it's just the junior, more inexperienced translator that are willing to try this out. So
Let me launch the last poll and we'll go to questions. To ask the translators here and online whether, if the bulk of the work they were doing was post-editing, whether they would consider leaving the industry or not, and see what people here say, and if they agree with your translators. So it seems to be split. Okay. Well, more people say, I will see how it goes, and yes, and fewer people say, well, it is split. This is, I don't know, how are you reading this?
Yeah, the no is less prominent.
It is prominent, but it is less, yeah. More people would stay or give it a go anyway, and interesting. Maybe I will ask this question again next year. Let's go to see if we have any questions from the floor, because we don't have a lot of time left. I would like to see if anyone would like to ask any question. The lady there in green.
Arantxa?
Hi, this is Arantxa Caballero from Nuada Translations and IT Association in Spain. I like to reflect on what Baltrat, I'm quoting you here, you said that machine translation output tend to be more similar than the output by human translators. I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, taking it to the extreme, if my favorite author's translator, usual translator, is out of business or dies, will I get a different style?
It's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah, and of course, thank you. It depends really, as always, it depends on the kind of text we are talking. And in literary translation, it seems important who the translator is, and publishers hire translators because they have a certain style. Yeah, even if readers maybe don't realize that on a conscious level, but here translator style does play a role, which it doesn't in other types of texts, of course.
Sure, but maybe as
But you can train a model, right?
Exactly, that was what I say.
That's been done.
We see machine translation wasn't in use 3-4 years ago. Now it's been used in more and more literary translation, non-fiction mainly, as you mentioned. In a few years, with more language combinations giving a better quality, the conversation will be different.
Sure. But it's hard.
So maybe, yeah, it's about
but
training
you can train, there are experiments, because of course, what is machine translation? It's not static, right? It evolves. So of course, people are looking to see, can I train a model with an author and a translator? So to maintain the voice of that translator. Do we want that? Do we want a translator that is dead to continue being alive? You know, translations by Cortázar of Poe. I don't know. Maybe not. But I think it's more complex than only style or voice, right?
Also, I think there are some ethical implications to that.
Very much so.
There's a lot to sort out on the ethics front. Let's take one question from Slido. The first one seems to be, again, about labels in a way. What do we call translation? What do we call transcreation, I suppose? Nowadays, translation is often equated with mere word replacement, whereas good translation is referred to as transcreation. Should we push back? Who wants to take this one?
Well, I would say that, to me, in the beginning of things, transcreation was when you were given a brief and you had to create the text. That was in marketing, right? Mm. And the translation was when you already had the source text, maybe the brief, and you had to translate the marketing text, But now they are using transcreation to mean translation, so I'm very confused myself. But I think is the need to sell something that when they want to refer to excellence. So I would push back to try and define things properly, but I think it's a lost race. Yeah,
I don't know if it also, for me, on a personal level, it didn't matter very much as long as the pay was appropriate.
Exactly. Exactly.
Walter, you wanted to make a comment?
Yeah, I think the first question actually also relates to the second question and the answer to the second question, because the way I see it and the way I would define translation is inherently a creative activity. And that would make the term transcreation quite superfluous.
Yeah, I think we're out of time. Thank you all for your contributions, and thank you to our audience for their participation. And please join me in a round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. Thank you, everyone. I would like to perhaps